Hi there. I just wanted to say a few words about what's going on in places like Portland and Chicago, where you have situations where ICE, federal agents, are trying to enforce immigration laws. And in many cases, they may be arresting and are arresting legitimate criminals. But whatever the situation is, they have the authority to make arrests, and you have situations where people are ICE agents are being assaulted. A lot of times by professional agitators, sometimes by just knuckleheads who want to get involved in this situation. And on top of that, you have so-called leaders like mayors of Portland, Mayor Brandon Johnson of Chicago, and Governor Pritzker of Chicago of Illinois, basically saying that their local law enforcement, their state law enforcement officials shouldn't be assisting federal law enforcement if they ask for help. This, I think, is really dangerous, and we're getting into a really dangerous time here. Now, it doesn't matter what your political persuasion is. At the end of the day, uh, law enforcement is law enforcement, and there is a mechanism for dealing with law enforcement that you feel has overstepped its bounds or done something illegal, and that's called the judicial system. It's called the courts. But rather than letting the courts do their thing, these so-called leaders are just telling their cops, "Hey, just don't engage and don't support and back up these cops." I mean, you have scenes of ICE agents being attacked, and they're trying to defend themselves, and you don't see any local police around because they've been told to stand down. Now that gets very dangerous. Can you imagine you have a U.S. military and they're being asked to deploy to a certain place, country, and because the leaders of those military organizations, say the Secretary of the Army, Secretary of the Navy, what have you, decide, well, that goes against my political uh, bent. I don't agree with us that they basically tell the troops to stand down. You don't have to go there. Don't have to do it. It makes no sense. Or if there's a military unit under attack conducting an operation, and you don't like the fact that they're in a particular country, don't like the political policy that caused the deployment of that military unit. So you decided, as a leader of whatever military organization, you're not going to go there. Of course, that's not going to happen, but that's what's happening now domestically in our towns and our cities. Not all of them, thank God. Most, I think, mayors, both Democrat and Republican, are not as stupid as the ones that you see in Portland and Chicago that have taken their political ire towards Trump or the Republicans or what have you to a different level. I think Mayor Johnson, actually, they passed legislation in the city that they created an, get this, ice-free zone. There's no such thing as an ice-free zone when you're living in the United States. No city can bar federal agents from doing their jobs. So that's just showboating, and that's not real leadership. And rather than trying to establish a dialogue with the federal government and try to figure out a common solution, it's just I'm just going to be an impediment. I'm going to be an obstruction. The problem is, being an obstruction could cost people their lives. It could cost federal officers who are they're just doing their job. You may have a fair amount of federal officers don't agree with the Trump immigration policy, but they have a job to do, and they're doing it. And so for them, for Antifa, or for, like I said, some knuckleheads out there that want to engage in violence against these federal officers, it's crazy. And I never grew up ever thinking that I would ever engage in anything where I would try to hurt anybody that's carrying a badge. And for the law enforcement officers out there in Portland and Chicago, I'm sure there's a fair amount of them that wish they could go and engage, but they're being hamstrung by whether it's leadership or lack of leadership at the police chief level, or whether and or lack of leadership definitely at the city and state level. So they're being hamstrung. But if I were chief of police in Portland or chief of police in Chicago, and I was told not to help, uh, I would probably lose my job over it. But I would not stand by and allow law enforcement officers from the federal government to be assaulted. The other thing is that when you have quote ice-free zones, you've got these. I've seen the videos. You've seen these people out there, especially Antifa, uh, who are out there banging drums and making noise, and other people carrying on. And the problem is you have people living in those areas that probably need to work, need to get to sleep, and the cops aren't coming. And nobody thinks about the citizens, the shopkeepers, the small business owners that are supposed to be there to help prop up the economy. But they're afraid to come out. If they call, whatever they have to call for assistance to keep the people from keeping that noise, from the wee hours of the morning, nobody's going to show up. So it's an abdication of responsibility. You don't have to like what ICE is doing. If you're definitely against it, then there's ways to deal with that, both in the courts and in the ballot box. Right? We all have that power, but there were a lot of things that I think a lot of people that are conservative didn't like about the last 4 years under Joe Biden. But you had some people that were stupid enough to try to commit violence against folks on the left. But you're seeing a heck of a lot more, I think, coming from the left right now than from the right. And this is not a left and right issue. It's a right and wrong issue. No one should attack a law enforcement officer. I don't care what you think. No one should order state or local or county law enforcement officials not to render aid and assistance to federal law enforcement officers, especially if they're being attacked and being assaulted and they could be in fear for their lives. That's just that's not right. And some of you will probably disagree and say, well, because people like to throw out the word Nazis and this and that. So we're just defending, no, you're not. No, you're not. You're too lazy to let the system play out in court. You're too lazy to file lawsuits. You're too lazy to get your butt to the ballot box and actually vote if you don't like who's the incumbent in the White House or in the governorship or in your city. You're too lazy to go vote, but you like to bitch and moan about how bad everything is. So I just hope that cooler heads prevail. I would like to see real leadership, especially if you're looking at Oregon and Chicago and Illinois. You don't see true leadership. Leadership is not rabble rousing. It's not creating a stupid piece of legislation that says these are ice-free zones when that cannot be enforced. What are you going to do? Have Chicago PD keep ICE from these quote ice-free zones? That's not going to happen. So all you're doing is rhetoric without any substance, and you're not making the situation any better for the people who supposedly, they always talk about the people this and the people that, but they don't really serve the people. They're serving their political parties and their political ends. Hey, no big whoop there. It happens in politics, but it would be nice if we could all pray for a little bit of calmness, a little bit of reason, and maybe a little bit of leadership that would show some restraint and reaching across the aisle and coming up with hopefully some solutions to some very complex problems. But that's how it is, and that's how I'm feeling about it right now. Be glad to hear what you have to think. All right, talk to you soon.